Well, this party, you know, is now 56 years old. If you look on our newspaper, you'll see volume 56. But I can tell you that now, more than ever, we believe firmly in the inevitability of socialist revolution in this country for two main reasons. One is the level of development here. Workers here are able to produce in tremendous abundance everything the people need to enjoy a secure and comfortable life. But look what's happening. Real wages continue to go down. Real unemployment is on the rise. The gulf between rich and poor grows wider every day. Production is stagnant, and the oppressed people are increasingly the scapegoats and the targets of state violence. What a lesson in the terrible contradictions of capitalism. Everyone could have an infinitely better life, but capitalist ownership and control makes that impossible. To liberate the wealth of society, we have to build a strong revolutionary movement. Can it be done? Well, you know, at one time in this country, millions of people were considered nothing but property, like a chair or a wagon. And the slave owners said, "You can't take my property away. Why, I paid good money for this man, or this woman, or even this child. I have the ownership papers right here." But the enslaved people and the abolitionists said to the slave owners and the slave traders, "Owning human beings is wrong. Tearing children away from their parents and selling them is wrong. We'll fight you in your system." And they did fight, by the millions. We all know that the Civil War didn't end racism in the US, but it ended the system of slavery. Now we're saying owning the labor of human beings is wrong. Trading in the wealth created by workers is wrong. It's nothing but wage slavery. The stock markets, the private corporations and banks, the billionaires, they rule over this society, and all that is wrong. We'll fight you to end it and build a socialist society where the wealth created by the people belongs to the people. Now, the second part of believing socialist revolution is inevitable is that it's not a new idea. There have been many socialist revolutions in the last century, and we salute them all. Their achievements have proven that socialism is an infinitely superior system, even where, for the most part, those revolutions have happened in very underdeveloped countries that have been attacked on all sides by imperialism and capitalism. Larry told you, today's the anniversary of the Russian Revolution. It opened a new period in human history. For the first time, the working class seized power and began trying to reorganize the economy on a socialist basis. Like all the revolutions that followed, it conquered through a heroic struggle by the exploited and oppressed classes. But the Russian Revolution also suffered the consequences of being the first. Other revolutions, as Larry said, they were attempted in Europe at that time, but they failed. That left the Russian revolutionaries alone and at a terrible disadvantage because Russia was so underdeveloped. immediately became the target of a class war waged by the most advanced capitalist countries of that time. Now, if you've never read anything by Lenin, you should try. All his writings and speeches are on the web. He never tried to cover up the shortcomings of the revolution. On the contrary, he told it like it is. He made very practical suggestions on what the Revolutionary Party should do, faced with a severe shortage of people with skills to run a state and an economy. Lenin called for cutting down the state bureaucracy to just what was necessary so that positions in the party and the state would not become filled with privilege seekers. And that was very hard because the poor people had a burning desire to overturn all the injustices of the past, but most of them were actually illiterate in Russia. They had to learn how to administer a country, how to modernize industry and agriculture. The better educated, they had a lot of those skills, but not the same revolutionary energy, and a lot of them put their own careers ahead of the revolution. There's a little pamphlet. It's called Better, Fewer, but Better, written in 1923, shortly before he died, in which Lenin urged his party not to rush into grandiose projects, but to work carefully and thoroughly to construct a state that empowered the workers and the poor peasants. He said about the European capitalists that they had failed to overthrow the new system created by the revolution, but they did prevent it from taking a step forward that would have justified the forecasts of the socialists to develop the productive forces with enormous speed. He said that in 1923, 6 years after the victory of the revolution. Now, looking back, given its immense problems, I think it's quite amazing that the Soviet Union achieved as much as it did in its 73 years of existence. The bureaucracy did grow, and so did the imperialist threats of nuclear war, and they wore down the masses and the leaders, and inequality too. But despite that, the USSR, with its planned economy, achieved enormous industrial and scientific development. What had been an agrarian country of illiteracy and hunger was the first to put up a space satellite, a woman in space, a man in space, the first in the world. And while trying to raise the standard of living at home, the Soviet Union also gave a great deal of aid to liberation movements around the world. That was due to the socialist side of the USSR, the side that forged ahead during the 1930s when the capitalist world was mired in the Great Depression, the side that enabled the people to survive and then beat back a head-on attack by millions of troops from imperialist Nazi Germany in World War II. It was the USSR that turned the tide in Europe, and it was Soviet troops who raised the red flag over the Reichstag in Berlin. Each revolution since then has gained from not being the first, not being alone. In this hemisphere, the 1959 Cuban Revolution inspired tremendous hope after the horrible years of anti-communism and right-wing dictatorships. You know, in 1961, Fidel Castro declared that Cuba had made, quote, a socialist revolution under the very noses of the Yankee imperialists. Now, that, in 1961, was the first time that he called the Cuban Revolution socialist in public. I was in the office of the July 26th movement here in New York when Fidel's speech came over the radio. The place erupted in joy. Berets were thrown in the air. People were jumping and hugging each other because they knew it meant that the revolution would not go back. It would not be intimidated. And Fidel made this speech during the Bay of Pigs invasion, when Cuba was being attacked by CIA-backed mercenaries. That's when he declared it a socialist revolution. But Cuba, facing up to the biggest imperialist in the world, right, was not alone. The Soviet Union provided Cuba with oil when US companies refused to refine it. It came to Cuba's defense after the Bay of Pigs, even risking a nuclear confrontation with the US in 1962. And Cuba has never given in, even after the breakup of the USSR, when the Cuban economy, so hurt by the US blockade, almost imploded. But Cuba survived, and today the US government has finally had to admit that the revolution is here to stay. I want you to know that our party did a lot to support the Cuban Revolution. I want to mention a particular event. The rest of it knows this very well, all the comrades do. It couldn't have happened without our party. It was a large rally in New York called Let Cuba Live in January 1992. Washington thought that Cuba couldn't survive without the Soviet Union and hardened its blockade and its threats. Now, Cuba had many, many admirers in the United States, but none were able to carry out a major solidarity event at that crucial time. So our party comrades stepped up and they said, we'll organize a rally for Cuba at the Jacob Javits Convention Center, a hall that holds thousands of people. Ramsey Clark, as well as Harry Belafonte, Alice Walker, Ossie Davis, and other well-known artists were on the program. We also organized security against the right-wing Cubans who tried to disrupt and also were demonstrating outside. Hundreds of Cuban supporters, some had come from across the country, couldn't even fit into this jam-packed hall. But they countered the right wing with their own picket line outside the building all afternoon on that frigid January day. It was one of those moments when having a strong, determined party of revolutionary workers made all the difference. I can't do justice in the time I have here to the great revolutions in Asia that have put building socialism on the agenda for 1/5 of the world's people. The Chinese Revolution, which went on for more than 2 decades before victory, was an earth-shaking development, just like the Russian Revolution. China, like the Soviet Union, then had to overcome extreme poverty and underdevelopment before most of its people could enjoy the material benefits of the revolution. The socialist revolutions in both Korea and Vietnam were attacked by US imperialism with such ferocity that the scars linger even today. We can't count the hundreds of times that our party and its youth group confronted the US capitalist establishment, demanding no war and aggression against Vietnam and North Korea. We organized the very first picket in the US against the Vietnam War in 1962. And Ho Chi Minh personally thanked us for that. Comrades went to jail for resisting the draft, holding militant demonstrations, and supporting anti-war GIs. The imperialist politicians made up all kinds of excuses for these wars, but in reality, it was because they feared and hated socialism so much that they would rather kill half the people than let them build a society free of bankers and bosses. We all know that China's progress since the revolution has been very complex, especially since the Communist Party decided to allow private capital there. Nevertheless, some things stand out crystal clear. China has lifted 500 million people out of poverty in the last 3 decades. Wages have tripled in the last 10 years. All of this was planned well in advance. Planning on this scale is impossible under capitalism, where competition and the profit motive dictate wages. It is because socialism still has strong roots in China that US imperialism grows more hostile every day. Unlike many other parties, WWP did not wash its hands of China when the leadership turned to the capitalist market for investment. Our party founder, Sam Marcy, made a very careful analysis of this turn, which was to the right, but concluded it was not a breakup of the worker state of the type that happened in the Soviet Union. We cannot be complacent about the dangers to any of the countries trying to build socialism as long as imperialism exists. But our role is not to abandon them if the policies of the leaders change back and forth. Most of all, we must build the revolutionary struggle here, which will help the whole planet get rid of the scourge of capitalism forever.